Welcome back. I'm standing here today with a brand new 2022 BMW iX, BMW's latest, greatest electric car. I had the opportunity to drive one of these on the first drive back in September of 2021, and I have a full video of my first drive impressions up here on State of Charge, so check that out if you're interested in this guy. But we're not here to do driving impressions today. I was able to secure one of these from a local dealership. BMW of Bloomfield in New Jersey just got this guy in. It's got 17 miles on it. Well, it did when I picked it up from the dealership, and they were kind enough to let me borrow it for a day to do DC fast charging tests. I don't think anybody has done any DC fast charging tests with this yet. Well, at least not independently. BMW released some data on it, which says that it should charge from 10 to 80% in about 35 minutes. The peak charging rate's about 200 kilowatt. In any event, I just drove this guy down to zero, and we're going to now do a full 0 to 100% DC fast charging session to see just how good this guy charges. Now, it is cold here in New Jersey, and as most people know, when it's cold, DC fast charging typically gets affected negatively, and the cars don't accept as much power as they can when the batteries are warm. However, this was sitting in the heated showroom floor of BMW of Bloomfield all day today. And I just picked it up, drove it down here, drove it pretty hard too to try to keep that battery warm. So we don't have a cold soaked battery, and I'm thinking we might be able to pull the maximum that this guy can take. We're gonna find out in a few minutes because I'm gonna record that whole charging session. Then we're gonna analyze it like we always do. I'll make my usual charts and graphs, and we'll talk about just how good or how bad of a charging electric vehicle this car is. The iX has a 111 kilowatt hour battery pack. That's the total capacity. Of that, somewhere between 105 and 106 kilowatt hour is usable. So we're going to see how many kilowatt hour the Electrify America 350 kilowatt DC fast charger pumps into this guy. Now, of course, there'll be some charging losses, but we'll talk about all that in the wrap up. But first, don't forget, click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content here on State of Charge. Okay, so before we get into the recording, I want to remind everyone that most electric vehicle owners are only going to use DC fast charging occasionally when they're on road trips or just need to recharge the vehicle really quickly. And I just published a video here on State of Charge that is titled Everything You Need to Know About Charging the BMW iX. And in that video, I explain the different ways you can charge the iX. Now, for daily charging, most iX owners are going to elect to charge on level 2. Level 2 charging is actually the most convenient way to recharge your electric vehicle. You come home at night, you plug it in, and by the morning, the vehicle's always 100% charged. You leave in the morning with a fully charged vehicle. You can even set preconditioning. It can either be warmed or cooled down. That's actually the most convenient way to recharge your electric vehicle. But there's one thing that I want to point out. When installing your home electric vehicle charging equipment, I highly recommend hiring a licensed and insured electrical contractor. Now, you may have noticed that this channel is now sponsored. It's sponsored by Qmerit. Qmerit is North America's leading provider of home charging equipment installation services, as well as installation services for home energy storage and all electrification technologies. You could follow the Qmerit link in the description of this video to see just how Qmerit can help you with all of your home and business electrical installation needs. The iX has a maximum charge rate of 195 kilowatt, and within 2 minutes, the vehicle's pulling over 190 kilowatt. Pretty good. However, that doesn't last too long. And after only about 6.5 minutes, when we're at 16% state of charge, the charge rate begins to trickle down to about 170 kilowatt. And it holds it there for a few minutes before briefly jumping back up to 180 kilowatt. Now, after 15 minutes of charging, we're at 35% state of charge, and the iX is now charging at 145 kilowatt. After 20 minutes, the iX is at 45% state of charge and the charge rate is now 125 kilowatt. And we reach 50% state of charge in 22 minutes. Now that's really good for an EV that has such a large battery pack. As I mentioned, the iX has a 111 kilowatt hour battery pack, of which a little more than 105 kilowatt hour is usable. After 27 minutes, the charge rate drops below 100 kilowatt for the first time, and at the half an hour point, the iX is charging at 99 kilowatt and the state of charge is 62%. We hit 70% state of charge in 36 minutes, and you can see the charging station has now delivered 81 kilowatt hour. Not bad for 36 minutes of charging. After 40 minutes of charging, the iX is at 75% state of charge and is now accepting 74 kilowatt. Now I'm going to stop the video now that the iX has reached 80% state of charge, which happens at about 45-minute mark. I'm going to do so because BMW states the iX will recharge from 10% to 80% in under 40 minutes when charging from a 350 kilowatt DC fast charger. We started at 0% and it took us 45 minutes. So I looked back to check when we reached 10% state of charge, and that happened after about 4.5 minutes of charging. So we went from 10% to 80% in a little over 40 minutes. Now that's not quite as quickly as BMW promises, but as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't under ideal conditions for DC fast charging, being as cold as it was outside. Still, even with the cold weather, the vehicle came very close to BMW's promised time. Now we typically recommend to unplug once you reach 80% on a DC fast charger, and that's because the charging rate really drops off considerably. But the iX charges pretty well at high state of charge, and it only takes about 11.5 minutes to go from 80% to 90%, and it's still charging at 55 kilowatt at 90%. That's pretty good. But like all EVs, once you get over 90%, the charge rate really slows down, and it took us another 26 minutes to go from 90% to 100% state of charge. And this is why we say unplug and move on from the DC fast charger once you reach about 80% or 85%, because it's just not worth waiting unless you really need every kilowatt hour you can get in order to make your next destination. So we finished up the 0 to 100% recording in 1 hour and 23 minutes. It cost me $39.66 with the Electrify America Pass Plus membership that I have. And that charges me $4 per month as a membership fee. Now, if I wasn't a Pass Plus member, it would have cost me an additional $15.36, which is basically 4 months worth of membership fees. So if you plan to use the Electrify America network more than 3 or 4 times per year, it really makes financial sense to become a Pass Plus member. Now, during this session, the charging station delivered 120.435 kilowatt hour. The iX has a 111 kilowatt hour battery, but only 105.2 kilowatt hour is accessible to use. And I didn't drive the iX until it wouldn't move anymore, just until the state of charge reached 0. And all electric vehicles have a small amount of energy left in reserve after the state of charge reaches 0. So I'm sure I had close to a kilowatt hour in there when I plugged in. So the battery probably only received about 104 to 104.5 kilowatt hour. The additional 15 to 16 kilowatt hour are charging losses. And that adds up to about 15%, which is a little higher than what we typically see. We typically see somewhere between 8 and maybe 10 or 12% charging losses. Next up, we're going to take a look at the charts that I always prepare for these DC fast charging analysis. The first one we're going to look at is the charging power chart, which shows the full charging curve for the iX. Then we're going to take a look at the time to charge chart, which shows you how long you have to plug in to add a certain amount of miles. That, in my opinion, is the most important one because, after all, what most people are really just concerned with is how long do I have to stay there to add a certain amount of miles. Okay, so as I noted during the charging recording, as soon as we plugged in, the charging rate jumped up to close to the maximum charging rate of 195 kilowatt. We actually saw a peak of 194 kilowatt, but only for a minute or so. After about 12 minutes, the charge rate dropped down to 145 kilowatt and mostly held there until about 32% state of charge. However, we did see a couple of quick spikes upward, and that really tells us that the vehicle was thermal limiting here. It was dropping the charge rate so the thermal management system could cool something down. It could be the battery or some component that's involved in the charging process, and it got too hot, so the iX slowed the charging rate down so it could cool off. BMW's published charging curve, and we credit them here for publishing this because very few manufacturers actually give us this information. It shows a straight line all the way up to about 40% state of charge. So if the vehicle didn't need to cool something down, the charging curve would have looked something more like this. But that's just the theoretical charging curve, and meaning under perfect conditions, this is how the vehicle is capable of charging. However, in most cases, customers will not experience the perfect theoretical charging curve in real-world DC fast charging. The iX then holds about 145 kilowatt until 41% state of charge before beginning this consistent walk down to the 83% state of charge point when the vehicle is now taking in a little over 50 kilowatt. What's interesting is we see this little jump up here to the same charging rate that the vehicle was accepting at 83%. And that leads me to believe that this should be a flat line here. The car was once again throttling back the charging rate to cool things down. What I really did like was how the iX holds a good charge rate all the way up to about 97 or 98% state of charge. Many EVs slow down to like level 2 charge rates once they get over 90%, and they take forever to top off. But the iX charges pretty well even with a high state of charge. Okay, so next up we have the charging time graph. And as you can see here on the x-axis, it's the charge time in minutes, and the y-axis shows the vehicle's state of charge. After 10 minutes of charging, we were at 24% state of charge. After 20 minutes, 45%. After 30 minutes, we were 62% charged. After 40 minutes, it was 75% state of charge. After 50 minutes, we were at 85%. And after 1 hour of charging, the vehicle was at 92% state of charge and finished up in 123 minutes from 0 to 100%. Okay, so next up, let's take a look at what that means with regards to miles. Now, I usually like to have my 70 mile an hour highway range test done when I prepare these graphs, but in the case of the iX, I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I have one on loan in about a month, so I'll be able to do that then. But for now, we're just going to talk about EPA range rating, and the 2022 BMW iX xDrive 50 with the 20-inch wheels has an EPA range rating of 324 miles. So that's what we're using, 324 miles as the fully charged driving range. And if you use that, after 13 minutes, we've added back 100 miles of range. And it takes exactly a half an hour to add 200 miles of range. And in 1 hour of charging, we added 300 miles of driving range. Well, that's it for our BMW iX xDrive 50 DC fast charge analysis video. The iX is a pretty good DC fast charging electric vehicle, but there is room for improvement. And I have talked to BMW and they said that they're keeping an eye on that and they can do software updates to improve the charging curve. So we'll keep an eye on that. And if we do see any type of noticeable improvement, we will retest the vehicle and see if it does any better. Now, before you go, I want to remind you that this video is sponsored by Qmerit. So take a look at the Qmerit website in the description of this video and see how they can help you with all your electric vehicle charging, installation, and home energy storage installation needs. And thanks for watching.